Great, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us here today. This is a webinar that we're putting on in the series where we're focused on clinical trials and clinical research in SMA. And today we have Biogen, who's going to be joining us and telling us about some of their current activities and also some of their future plans that are related to Spinraza, which is an approved treatment, but there's a lot of work going on around Spinraza with new trials, new research and studies that are going on that Biogen's going to come on and give some details for all of us to hear about. And then in the last part of this webinar, we'll also go over some questions that were submitted in advance and get some answers to those as well. So if we go to the next slide. We are now at the point where we have approved treatments for SMA that have changed what SMA is. And Spinraza, that we are going to get into some more details on, was obviously the first treatment ever approved for SMA. And it's about 5 years, a little bit longer than that now, that Spinraza was first approved. We're going to go over why we're still focused on clinical trials, clinical research broadly in SMA, but very interestingly here, what Biogen is focused on around Spinraza. Spinraza is approved, but there's still a lot more to do. There's an awful lot of activity that's actually very interesting that Biogen is focused on. Even after getting that approval and it being out there for 5 years, we still have more work, more things that we want to do. And Biogen is doing a lot of activity in this area. So we have changed what SMA is. We're seeing some really good, really exciting results from Spinraza and the other treatments that are now available. But we do have more work to do. And if we go to the next slide, to try to focus a little bit on why we're still focused on this earlier stage, even though we have approved treatments, what we're saying is SMA is not cured yet. We're getting really good results and really good results in certain areas, but we have more work to do. And so what we're looking at is we have treatments that are working. They do a good job in terms of changing what SMA would have been, what it was with a natural history when it was untreated, which was this rapid progression down. We have treatments now that can stop that progression. And in certain cases, if you get in very early, really kind of look to prevent the disease, the symptoms from coming up in the first place. But we do have more to do where we're looking at, okay, if we're stopping the disease now with genetic treatments like Spinraza, which works on the backup gene SMN2, what is it that we're doing to try to bring back strength? Do more than just stopping, and this is now especially for older individuals where symptoms are already present. What is it that we can do to actually look to increase strength, increase function, rather than just stopping, which is good, stopping, not going downhill anymore, but we're looking for that increase. We're looking for restoring, improving function and strength over time. And so that's what a lot of our efforts are now focused on broadly in SMA, and especially here, Biogen is very focused on this as well, working around Spinraza. If we go to the next slide. What we're also focused on, and it's actually very exciting, is we have 3 approved treatments. These are the blue lines that we have in the pipeline here, and Spinraza is at the top there with Biogen. What we also have going on is a lot of clinical trial activity at earlier stages. So those are our approved treatments. The next batch that we're actually talking about today is programs that are in clinical development. And you'll see that Biogen with Spinraza and some other code names, the compounds that you'll see on here, has clinical trials going on. What we also have going on is clinical trials, clinical research that's happening with those approved treatments at the top. So one of the big takeaways and why we're doing this webinar series right now is that we have an awful lot of clinical trials that are going on. We have approvals, but we're actually busier now with clinical trials than we ever were, even before approvals. And this is great. This is what we want to see, because again, we know we're not done. We don't have the cure yet. We need this work to happen. And we have an awful lot of work that's going on, which is great to see with the current treatments, what we can do to optimize those. And we'll get into it a little bit later on. What can you do to add on top of the current treatments? This is kind of the approach that we're taking to look at that, building from just stopping to improving, restoring, especially for older and symptomatic individuals already. But I think one of the big takeaways, and hopefully from this slide, even though it doesn't quite show everything going on, the single lines here, some of these single line programs have multiple clinical trials, multiple clinical research efforts that are going on right now. And there's a lot of activity. And so that's why we're doing this webinar series. If we go to the next slide. We wanted to, as we're doing in these other webinars, give a bit of a reminder, a bit of an update about what's important to pay attention to with clinical trials, clinical research, and trying to make sure that we're we're staying focused on the differences between having an approved treatment where we're focused on now we need to give people the opportunity to get access to that approved treatment. Here we're talking about Spinraza, and we have a lot of activities, a lot of efforts where we're working to try to make sure, according to the FDA approved label, people that are looking for access to Spinraza can get it through hospitals, through HCPs, through payers. So we have that area of work that's going on. This is different. This, even though we're talking about research and trials around Spinraza, these are research efforts. And there's things that we've got to pay attention to that are different there. You've got to look at this as a different area than just access, that it's not about, if you're going to look to participate in one of these trials or these studies, it's not about getting access to that approved treatment. It's about participating in research that's going to help all of us as a community get answers and get data that we need to move forward. And so we do try to make sure that we're breaking down the way that we look at these research efforts in a different way. And where we're doing these reminders about these trials, research efforts are conducted in a way where it's not about getting everybody access, getting everybody involved. There's often going to be criteria, narrow criteria, select groups of people that are going to participate in these trials, because again, it's not about getting access for everybody that can under a label. That's done with this principle of you want to keep everything controlled in a research study, in a research trial, except for the thing that you're looking to study, whether it's Spinraza, a different version of Spinraza, a different dosing level. That's what you're looking to get the answer on. So you want to try and keep all of the other criteria, who's involved, what else is going on, consistent, so that you get clear data, a clear answer at the end on this research, on this question. Nothing here is proved when we're talking about these research studies. We need to kind of do this research to get an answer for ourselves as a community. We want this clear data. We want a conclusive answer from these studies to allow people to make the right choices. Us as the community, individuals, families, doctors are looking for this, payers as well, and in some cases the FDA as well. So this is all about getting clear data, clear answers that's conclusive. It's not about trying to give access, an alternative access pathway to an approved treatment. If we go to the next slide. Well, we're going to hear quite a bit here. There are a number of efforts that Biogen is focused on, and I'll try and put them into certain buckets of what the goals of the particular research activity is. So certainly what's focused on with Spinraza is it's an approved treatment. It's focused on the backup gene, which works on trying to increase that level of SMN protein. There's some questions on, can you improve that? Can you optimize what Spinraza does? It works really well, but are there opportunities to, and especially one of the key things here is, look at the dosing. Can you change the dosing level, dosing frequency, how and when Spinraza is delivered to get an even better result? And so that's a lot of work that's going on to kind of optimize what Spinraza currently is by tweaking its dosing, its delivery, how it's delivered, when and where it's delivered into the body. So that's one big kind of question that is being looked at by Biogen. Another bucket is looking at now, with having multiple approved treatments, what happens if you switch between them? If you go from one treatment to another, not necessarily a combination at the same time, but switching, going from one and then stopping taking that, going on to another, what does that mean? What are the results? We don't know. We don't have any data or answers on, is that good to do? Do you get a benefit? And so that's some studies that are happening that will be good for all of us to get that information to be able to kind of make good choices going forward. Biogen has some work that they're doing there as well to look at not just Spinraza, but switching between the current treatments that we have. And then what we're also focused on is not just the current treatments, but what can we do with here Spinraza that's approved, a genetic treatment that's focused on the genetics, SMN2 here in the SMN protein. Can you get an improvement? Can you build on top of that with a treatment that works in a very different way? And we focused on this in other areas where we're talking about treatments that might work on the muscles that don't work so directly on the genetics and the SMN protein. Can you combine genetic muscle treatments together and again get a little bit more out than we're getting currently just with Spinraza on its own? And that's where we're looking for that. Great to stop. Can we build on top of it? Can we bring back strength and function? And so there's some work that's going on there as well. Again, it's a big area for us as a community, and Biogen's got some efforts that they'll go over as well on that. If we go to the next slide. which does talk about this combination side. What I wanted to highlight more on this slide than anything else as well was how important the other aspects of care are to treatment. It's not just single genetic treatment. It's not just looking at the combinations or the switches between what we have, or a combination of a genetic treatment with a muscle one. It's combining the drug treatments with the best standards of care as well, with physical therapy, nutrition, and those aspects, which is also going to help us do that restoring, building back strength. That's going to be just as important to make sure that we know what works, what's important. And this gets a lot into the area which we are very focused on now, we've talked about before, with real world evidence, where we're collecting information, not just in these studies and research trials, but from the real world setting of what's happening when people are doing these aspects of care in certain ways with the treatments. What are the results that we get? Can we improve and standardize care that does make a difference for everybody in the SMA community? If we go to the next slide. And the final part I'll talk about here before handing it over to Wendy from Biogen is, in talking about clinical research, there are these specific trials, studies that are going on. But again, the big message is we're very busy in this area right now, busier than I think we've ever been with the number of trials that are going on. So we still have to make sure that we have enough hospitals, HCPs that are involved, that can conduct these studies in the right way, that we have that consistency. Again, it's trying to make sure that we're consistent when we're doing these trials with who's involved, the sites that are involved, so that if we do see a change, we know it's about the treatment, the drug that we're looking at, the changes that we're looking there. So we need an awful lot of sites here in the US and around the world as well that are involved in these clinical trials, where we have so many going on right now. So we're very focused on that still, building our clinical trial infrastructure, the sites that are involved. The other key part that's a little bit newer for us that we're focused on, and Biogen has some efforts that they'll talk about, is how do we measure the changes in these trials? These changes that we're looking at now are going to be different than the changes we were looking at before, where we were looking at a change from somebody that was not on any treatment at all to a treatment, and how you measure that change. Now we're looking at what's on top of a change that's already taken place. If somebody's already had an impact, something's changed in SMA, now it's a change on top of that. We need more sensitive measures to be able to see those. They might be more subtle changes. They might take longer to show up. And so we need different ways of measuring that to be able to do these trials in the right way. And so there's a lot of work there to now focus on developing these new measurements. And again, they're going to be more subtle. They're going to be more difficult to see when they're taking place over a longer time and when they're done in combinations especially. So Biogen will talk about some efforts where we're looking also at digital technologies. Can that be used to help us see these changes which might be more subtle, and combining some of these together as well. One of the key things that's also being looked at is what's called biomarkers, which is a way of not looking just for the physical changes, the physical symptoms that you might see, but can you test earlier on things that are inside the body, changes inside the body that you might not see on the outside. If you can do that, those are ways to kind of make quicker decisions, to be able to make measurements in a faster way than waiting for something that might take a few years to show up. And so that's a big effort that will help us in these next clinical trials, help us get that answer and get that answer sooner as well, if we can figure out some of these biomarkers too. So with that, I'd like to turn over to Wendy from Biogen to join us. Great.
Wonderful.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, if you want to take it from here.
Happy to. Thank you so much, Kenneth and Sarah and the entire Cure SMA team for the invitation to present today and for that kind introduction and background. I'm thrilled to be here to share an update with you all, the Cure SMA community. My name is Wendy Agnesi. I am the head of the U.S. Neuromuscular Medical Team here at Biogen in the United States. And Sarah, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Cure SMA asked us to present to the community today an update on a wide range of topics, and Kenneth really did a wonderful job touching on a number of these. It includes an update on our clinical development program and other efforts related to our real-world evidence, digital health, and biomarker research. The future updates, as Kenneth alluded to, will also highlight a high-level overview of our SMA pipeline at Biogen. Next slide. So we'll start with Nusinersen today. Nusinersen is a prescription medication that was approved by the FDA in December in 2016, so we just passed our 5-year anniversary, and it's approved for the treatment of SMA in both pediatric and adult patients. The approved dose is 12 milligrams, and it is delivered via intrathecal or IT administration with loading doses as noted on the slide, followed by maintenance doses every 4 months. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we'll spend a bit of time looking at our clinical trial updates. So for more than 15 years, Biogen has been a pioneer in clinical development of potential treatments for conditions with high unmet needs. And thanks to the tireless efforts of all the trial participants, the site investigators, and the entire community, meaningful therapeutic progress has been achieved. That being said, and Kenneth alluded to this too, we always are looking for the next step. We do acknowledge that there's still more to learn about SMA and the potential impact of different therapeutic approaches on disease progression. Today, Biogen's clinical development program contains 2 types of programs. First, as noted on the top half of this slide, there are clinical trials that are currently exploring specific research questions related to the currently approved dose of Nusinersen, such as SHINE, NURTURE, and RESPOND trials. Secondly, on the bottom half of this slide, there are those trials that seek to understand the safety and the potential efficacy of an experimental higher dose of Nusinersen as studied in the ongoing DEVOTE, ONWARD, and ASCEND trials. I'll be providing an update on all of these trials today with the exception of NURTURE. And you can see the projected timelines for each of these trials contained in our program on this slide as they continue from 2022 and beyond. As always, and I'll mention this a few times in today's presentation, but please always patients should consult with their healthcare provider regarding any participation or consideration of clinical trials. And for further information, all of Biogen's clinical trials can be found at clinicaltrials.gov. So the first study on the top of this slide is SHINE, and that's where we'll dive into a bit of detail in the next slide if we can move forward. Wonderful. So SHINE did start in 2015, and it's been the largest long-term extension study of people with SMA receiving therapy. There's nearly 300 individuals with SMA from 14 countries that have participated in SHINE. The SHINE participants have previously been enrolled and completed either the ENDEAR study, CHERISH, CS12, CS3A, or the EMBRACE study. Data from SHINE participants, like you, many of you participating on today's call, have contributed to over 20 medical journal publications and more than 185 medical conference presentations, which has really helped advance our general understanding of SMA, as well as the long-term benefits and risks of Nusinersen. And from the center of the slide, together it's really been the dedication, the commitment of the patients, the parents, the study doctors, and the site team members that have had lasting impact on the SMA community. So thank you for your years of commitment to this research and your contributions to overall care of SMA. Next slide, please. Great. So SHINE was originally initiated to generate information for the community and regulators regarding the long-term safety and efficacy of Nusinersen. After more than 5 years now, the SHINE study is on track to achieve its goals, and the first participants will reach study completion dates in 2022, this year. Biogen has been actively encouraging and supporting study doctors in devising transition plans for each enrolled patient at their site. SHINE participants should continue to work with their study doctor for an end-of-study transition plan. I will note that not every person in SHINE will have the same study completion date. It's dependent on when that person started in the study. As I mentioned on the previous slide, participants enrolled in SHINE had previously completed an earlier Nusinersen trial, so not everyone rolled into the SHINE study at the same time, hence their completion of the study dates will not be the same. So if you are a study SHINE participant, your study doctor will be discussing your specific end of study timeline and transition plans with you. Next slide, please. So staying on the topic of studies that are exploring the impact of the currently approved dose of Nusinersen, we'll now turn our attention to the RESPOND study. This trial is currently enrolling. The objective of this study is to examine the clinical benefit and assess the safety of Nusinersen in infants and children who have previously received onasemnogene and have demonstrated suboptimal response to their gene therapy. RESPOND is an open label study, which means that there's no placebo, sham, or control arm in this study. RESPOND will be conducted at 20 sites around the world and be approximately 2 years in duration. The goal for RESPOND is to enroll about 60 participants who will have their first dose of Nusinersen by a maximum age of 36 months. Within that group of 60 participants, there will be a primary group of about 40 participants who meet additional inclusion criteria, such as being ages 9 months or younger at the time of their first dose of Nusinersen. So the participants must be diagnosed with SMA, as well as been treated with gene therapy prior to inclusion in the study. There is a minimum of the 3 months which is required between gene therapy and the first Nusinersen dose in the study. So each participant within RESPOND will receive the current standard dose, the approved dose of 12 milligrams of Nusinersen, dosed with the 4 loading doses given on days 1, 15, 29, and 64, followed by a total of 5 maintenance doses, 1 dose in that maintenance phase every 4 months. Next slide, please. So staying with RESPOND, I'm excited to confirm that we've made important site activation and enrollment progress since our first patient joined the study around this time last year. We now have 16 sites open, including 12 sites here in the United States. You can see the names of the actively enrolling sites in the US here on the right hand of the slide. Working closely with the site investigators, we've been able to successfully enroll 28% actually of our study goal, including 8 patients here in the US. And as mentioned earlier, for any additional information regarding our trials, including RESPOND, you can please visit clinicaltrials.gov. So we'll now turn our attention to the other group of trials in our clinical development program. And these are exploring the use of experimental higher dose of Nusinersen. The first high dose study we will discuss is called DEVOTE. It's a phase 2-3 clinical trial to evaluate the safety and efficacy of this experimental higher dose of Nusinersen. The trial is active controlled, which means that all participants in the trial will receive Nusinersen. So again, no placebo arm. It's also referred to as dose escalating, which means that some participants in the trial will receive higher doses than others. We're aiming to enroll about 172 people with SMA in the DEVOTE study, and this includes adults, children, and infants. And on the next slide, I will review the different parts of this program. We can move to the next slide. Thank you. So the DEVOTE study has 3 parts to it. The first part, Part A, was designed to provide important safety information about this experimental higher dose. And based on initial review of data from this Part A, investigators were able to move and begin enrolling into Part B of the study. Part B of DEVOTE is the pivotal part of the study. While all participants in Part A received the same experimental higher dose of Nusinersen, some patients in Part B will be randomized to either receive the currently approved dose of Nusinersen or the higher dose of Nusinersen. And currently, we're enrolling the first two different age groups into Part B, starting with the infantile onset cohort. And that said, we do anticipate expanding enrollment to later onset SMA patients in the very near term. Finally, Part C of DEVOTE is also open for enrollment. This part of the study seeks to enroll people with SMA of any age who have been receiving the approved dose of Nusinersen for at least 1 year prior to enrollment. 2 comments I'll make about DEVOTE. First, I want to acknowledge that the participants who completed participation in DEVOTE are invited to enroll into the open label extension arm of the study called ONWARD. In ONWARD, all participants will receive the same experimental higher dose of Nusinersen. And I'm very pleased to report that there are more than 50 sites currently enrolling in DEVOTE, and that we've already enrolled 50% of participants into the study. And again, additional information can be found at clinicaltrials.gov. We can move on to the next slide, please. Wonderful. So now we'll turn our attention to ASCEND, which is also currently enrolling. ASCEND is a phase 3B study to assess the potential clinical benefit of the investigational higher dose of Nusinersen in adults, teens, and children that were previously treated with risdiplam. It is an open label study, meaning that there's no placebo, control, or sham group in the study. And again, that means all patients will receive Nusinersen. The study will be conducted in approximately 40 sites around the world and last about 2.5 years. This study will enroll 135 participants, including adults, teens, and children with later onset SMA. Specifically, as listed on the right hand of this slide, the study patient population will include those aged 5 to 39 years old, greater than 20 kilograms, later onset and non-ambulatory SMA patients, those who either never received Nusinersen, often referred to as Nusinersen naive patients, or that they had Nusinersen before starting risdiplam. The last criteria on the right-hand side is the willingness to stop risdiplam and be able to receive Nusinersen. In the US, there are 4 sites that are activated and currently enrolling, and these are located in Arkansas, Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia. Next slide, please. Great. So now we'll turn our attention to other areas of Biogen's commitment to the SMA community. And this includes the development of digital health tools, real-world evidence, and biomarker research. And we will start on the next slide with digital health. So first, we know that there's a lot of interest in the patient community and the medical community about the potential to use digital tools to advance our research. Biogen recently launched an entire franchise to explore just that, and it's called Biogen Digital Health. One of the tools that we're exploring in the neurology space, including in SMA, is called Connectum. Connectum is being used in the ASCEND trial that we just talked about on the previous slide. It's a smart-based application which leverages smart sensing technology, like your phone's touchscreen or movement to capture data. So this app may be a helpful tool to document a more accurate and complete picture of how neurological diseases impact a person's daily living. So as an example, in SMA, we're exploring whether this app can help with monitoring upper motor function as well as dexterity. So Connectum, the app, is a tool to help us address those types of research questions. In addition to Connectum, the Biogen Digital Health team is also advancing research on additional digital health applications. So Biogen Digital Health, BDH, is working with patient advocacy groups like Cure SMA to gather patient perspective and input to truly help shape these potential additional applications moving forward. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, Connectum is being studied in the ASCEND study, And while we acknowledge the opportunities to study this type of technology in the clinical trial setting to help advance medical research, we also realize that the community is seeking digital health solutions for use in real world today. So to this end, Biogen released the SMA Ability app at the end of 2021. The SMA Ability app is a digital journal with the functionality to set goals, reminders, track progress, and it integrates with wearables and other apps aimed to improve your goal achievement. So you start by tracking, by setting your personal goals or actions that are most important to you. So the examples as noted on this slide for personal goal setting include potentially attending physical therapy, practice sitting unsupported, prepping of meals for the week. So you decide what you want to measure and how you want to measure it against your goals. So how long was I able to perform a task? Did I complete a task? How did I do on that task? You can also personalize it to get reminders. So you can download and share the data you collect, as well as pair with voice assistants or other wearable devices. We move to the next slide, please. So we'll move on from digital health and focus on real-world evidence. So Biogen has the privilege to support more than 15 different independent SMA patient registries over the last several years. These registries are important as through them, independent investigators can collect and analyze data from the real world, meaning that data are collected in the clinic during a patient's exam or visit with their doctor or multidisciplinary care team. This real-world data or evidence can help inform the community regarding the natural progression of disease, the impact of different treatments, and other key topics. To date, these efforts through the registries have grown to include more than 4,500 people with SMA from at least 19 different countries. And as you may already be aware, we're also pleased that we have been invited to join with other companies in supporting the development and growth of a patient registry and real-world evidence database hosted by Cure SMA. We truly look forward to this effort's acceleration and growth in the upcoming months. Next slide, please. So now shifting to biomarkers. Our company continues to investigate potential biomarkers in SMA. So for background, and Kenneth alluded to this earlier, a biomarker is a measurable indicator of the severity or the presence of some disease state or other physiological state. So identifying an appropriate biomarker could help detect disease activity and understand the treatment response. Biogen is studying neurofilament levels as a non-invasive, easily accessible biomarker to monitor a person's response to SMA therapy. Recent data from children with later onset SMA treated with Nusinersen provide reason to believe that the neurofilament is a potential biomarker that can inform on changes of disease activity. And these data were based on 75 study participants from Cherish and Shine. Because of these learnings from these earlier trials, Biogen has integrated the measurement of neurofilament, this biomarker, as an additional investigational endpoint in our ongoing studies, including DEVOTE, RESPOND, and ASCEND. So I see Kenneth coming back on for the questions from the community. I would like to comment and thank everyone for your thoughtful submissions of questions prior to today's presentation. I do want to acknowledge that there were a few questions submitted that were related to a specific individual patient care, and those kinds of questions should really be best discussed with your doctor and your managing SMA care team. So those questions, although I thank you for submitting them, they won't be addressed in today's discussion.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for that overview as well of all of the activities that you, Biogen, have going on right now. There's a lot there. It's very exciting to see all of that work activity going on to try and make the most of Spinraza. So it's really exciting to see that. So what we will do is we'll go to these specific questions. And Wendy, as you were saying, we had a lot that were submitted. So we tried to pull out a few which were general themes that we saw come in from a lot of people. And we'll ask these specific questions and maybe the 6 or 7 that we'll be able to get to. So if we go to the next slide. This question came into us and we saw it a few times. Quite broadly, being interested to hear more about treatments for adults with SMA.
Sure. So thank you again for the question submission. So regarding Biogen Spinraza Nusinersen, it was approved in 2016 by the FDA for the treatment of both pediatric and adult patients. And as mentioned in today's presentation, our ongoing clinical development program continues to study Nusinersen in both the pediatric and adult patients. And as always, individual care plans, whether it be adult or younger patient, and including participation in potential clinical trials, is best discussed with your healthcare provider.
If we go to the next question that came in. So asking here about the medication, so talking about Spinraza, asking, will it be administered sooner than what it is currently, that every 4-month mark?
So the Spinraza treatment that's being studied in the clinical development program now is initiated with the 4 loading doses. The first 3 loading doses are administered 14-day intervals. The 4th loading dose is administered at a 30-day dosing interval after that 3rd loading dose. And then the maintenance dose is administered every 4 months thereafter. So right now we discussed the higher dose, but as far as that interval of giving the intrathecal administration, that remains the same as what is currently available.
The next question we've got, asking, are there any openings in the trials that you were talking about? Anything open for adults to get into any of those trials?
Sure, no, great question. So the Ascend is currently enrolling adults aged 18 to 39. And we did chat about this a few minutes ago. As far as the Ascend study, just as a reminder, that is the phase 3B study to assess the safety and potential clinical benefit of the investigational higher dose of Nusinersen in adults, teens, and children that were previously treated with risdiplam. So yes, there is a trial that's currently enrolling adults.
If we go to the next slide, although I'll just say there as well, as you were saying, Wendy, there's clinicaltrials.gov that has a lot of information on currently recruiting trials. We also have it on the Cure SMA site. We have a page where we're trying to list all the trials that are currently recruiting. This question, somebody was interested, asking, they're interested in Devote trial and when that is going to be ready to roll out and begin.
Sure. So this again, the studies that are exploring the potential safety and efficacy of the higher dose, the experimental higher dose of Spinraza, are still ongoing, and Devote is still enrolling patients. So this is an active, ongoing trial. So some timelines were provided on the first slide, but as far as specific dates around availability of that output, I would say check clinicaltrials.gov and please consult your physician for any additional detail.
So the next question that came in was asking, when will Biogen, increase the dosage of Spinraza for adults?
So the studies that they're exploring the potential safety and efficacy of the higher dose of Spinraza are still ongoing, as mentioned. So we discussed today these studies that are Devote, Onward, and Ascend. Their anticipated timelines for completion are over the next few years. And again, clinicaltrials.gov and your HCP are a great resource for updates as we move through milestones with these high dose studies.
The next question that came in was asking, are you working on anything that would be an oral replacement for Spinraza?
I'm sure there's quite a bit of interest there. The short answer is no. And the reason is because Spinraza is an antisense oligonucleotide, an ASO. So both the size of the molecule and the chemical characteristics of it prevent it from the blood-brain barrier penetration. So therefore it cannot be given orally. So it's intrathecally administered that then allows it to target the cells in the CNS.
And the next question, it is a pretty specific one, but I think we wanted to have this one here because we are talking about this area right now in SMA where we have multiple trials going on. And so there's questions coming up on, if you're in one trial, what are the options for others that we have going on? There's a lot that will be starting this year. So the question specifically, if you are currently enrolled in the ongoing Spinraza trial, I'm not sure which one this was specifically, can you then potentially participate in the upcoming Scholar Rock trial?
And again, I'm sure there's quite a bit of interest there, and this is one that I would default to your physician to have that conversation around appropriateness of any trial participation. They'll each have their own inclusion, exclusion criteria, and different considerations that are really a conversation between a potential participant in a study and your physician. So I would default and recommend that you have that conversation there.
It'll definitely get quite complicated there as we're talking about combinations here. This is kind of as well. So what are the criteria when it's one of the treatments is approved? Are you on an approved route to the treatment, or are you in a trial route to that one treatment that's in a combination? So it's definitely something, as you're saying, to pay close attention to and really drill down directly with your own HCP. And
Absolutely.
Sounds good. And I think that might have been the last question. If we just go to the next one. Yeah, that was the last one. So thank you, Wendy. Thank you for joining us, giving that overview and answering those questions. And we'll see if we can have this information available later on. Definitely, this is an overview. We're talking about these topics at summits that we're doing around the country, and very excited about talking about these topics when we get together in person at the conference in just a few months now, in about 4 months. So thank you for joining us. And thank you everybody for coming on this webinar with us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kenneth, and the entire Cure SMA team and all the participants today. Really appreciate your participation.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.